I do love the people who attend and tune in to these events, for they're always asking the why questions, always looking for greater insight and understanding. Today, before I share with you some of our new findings, I would like to give you some insights from my book, Lost America's Antiquities, A Hidden History, and also from our documentary, The Lost Civilizations of North America. They are both critical reviews on how history has been handed down to our day, asking the why, how, and the who questions. That if there were advanced civilizations here in North America, why don't we know more about them? Why haven't they been more celebrated? And if the knowledge of these civilizations have been silenced, who silenced them and why? And how did that all come about? It is my hope that we'll be able to answer some of those questions for you today. We all have defining moments in our lives, experiences that have inspired our own personal research. For me, like many of you here and listening, it was in search of the promised land that we read about in the scriptures, the land choice above all other lands, the land of liberty, the land of the Gentiles, the land where prophecies and promises given would be fulfilled, the land where the New Jerusalem would be built, the land where Christ will come and dwell. So is the United States that promised land? In my research, in search of this promised land, it has led me to visit and explore many ancient archaeological sites of these ancient mound-building cultures that's found in North America. As shown in these photos, there are actually many sites that you can go and visit today. Even though thousands of these earthwork structures and mound sites have been destroyed, today there are still many ancient archaeological sites out there. If you are unable to really visit them on a personal basis, I would highly recommend viewing Rod Meldrum's collection of drone flyover videos, where Rod shares several dozen drone sites from a drone perspective. In 2017, I was visiting the Okamoki site in Macon, Georgia, where there is still 3 very impressive large mounds. One was a giant platform mound, another was a burial mound, and the third even had an inner chamber inside of it. After visiting these archaeological sites, it really begs the question, why Americans don't know more about these ancient mound-building cultures. I recently traveled with my son to Moundville, Alabama, which boasts some of the largest ancient mounds in North America. The site has 9 giant iconic mounds structures. At the peak of the Mississippian culture, there was over 29 platform mounds at this location, with an estimated population of over 30,000 residents. At this site, they found stunning artifacts, metal tools, weapons, refined copper ornaments, sister gardens, and native medicines. For the past 31 years in October, the Indian tribes gather to celebrate their ancestry as part of a large Indian celebration called the Parade of Fire, in which the Indians parade around these sacred grounds and climb atop these platform mounds. It has been said that history is to a nation what memory is to man, and that no one has really influenced the course of human history any more than historians, as history provides the foundational underpinnings that's really needed for the character building of a nation. While visiting the mounds in Alabama, I met with Michael, Choctaw Indian, who was one of the park's administrators, who had oversight over an Indian youth tribal group. We discussed how important history is in the development of a people, and how the American Indian ancient history has been referred to as prehistory, as if there's no written record of their people's existence, which loss of history has resulted in a loss of identity, as the world has little appreciation and understanding of the richness of the American Indian culture today. In 1814, the United States government, under Andrew Jackson, waged a war against the Creek Indians called the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. This battle was a devastating defeat of the Creek Indians of this area of the country. A battle that led to the passage of the Indian Removal Act of 1830, which led to the expulsion of the primary Indian tribes of Alabama territory, the Cherokee, the Choctaw, and the Creek Indians. Upon the 1830 publication of the Book of Mormon in Palmyra, New York, Joseph Smith began to reach out to the Indians in a missionary effort. He directed missionaries to the Cataracts Indians of Buffalo, New York, the Whatnots of Ohio, the Delaware Indians of Missouri, along with the Fox, the Sac, and the Seneca Indians tribes of that region of the country. Joseph Smith's outreach to the American Indian populations and these tribal leaders was not looked upon very favorably by these early men of science and government in the 1800s. The government officials over Indian affairs were concerned that Joseph Smith was advancing these ideologies that was going against their manifest destiny agenda, which was to gather up these Indians and put them on reservations, advancing ideas that the American Indian ancestry was much more than just mere savages. Both Elder LeGrand Richards and later Elder Tadar Callister, in his recent book, A Case for the Book of Mormon, shared that even Joseph Smith had concerns with how the Book of Mormon would be received. So he prayed, "Oh Lord, what will the world say?" And the answer came back, "Fear not, I will cause the earth to testify of the truth of these things." Given that the Book of Mormon describes a culture more advanced than many that you would find today, or the way that people believe them to be. So, in this presentation, I would like you to see if you can find evidence that there were more advanced cultures here in North America than we have been led to believe. And in so doing, ask yourself the question, is the earth testifying of the truth of these things? David Whitmer, one of the three special witnesses of the Book of Mormon, stated, "When we were first told to publish our statement, the testimony of the three witnesses, we felt sure that the people would not believe it. For the Book of Mormon told of a people who were educated, refined, and dwelt in large cities. The Lord told us that he would make it known to the people, and he would lead them to discover ruins of great cities and an abundance of evidence of the truth of the things which are written in the book." This quote was recently shared by Tad Callister in his book on page 44. So are there ruins of great cities found here in North America? And is there abundance of evidence out there? One of the best records of these ancient mound building cultures is a book of surveys that became the very first publication of the Smithsonian, The Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley, where E.G. Squires and Davis went out and surveyed hundreds of these mounds, fortifications, and earthwork structures. One question raised in the early 1800s was what to call these early ancient mound building cultures. The name given was Adena and Hopewell cultures, as they were named after the landowners on whose farms some of these earliest explorations had taken place, with the Hopewell culture being named after Captain Mordecai C. Hopewell. The Hopewell is viewed as the largest of these mound-building cultures. This map shows the Hopewell interaction sphere, as it shows that the Hopewell culture extends from Canada down the major waterways, okay, to the Gulf of Mexico, as their ancient sites have been primarily found in America's heartland. E.G. Squires, who authored the very first publication of the Smithsonian, the Ancient Monuments of Mississippi, was kind of like Joseph Smith in that E.G. Squires would also bring forward things that wasn't commonly accepted, that these cultures were more advanced. And so he would find himself in trouble with some of these early men of science and government, these social engineers of the 1800s. When his report findings went contrary to this manifest destiny agenda. Now, Squire, after turning over his first two books to the Smithsonian, complained about the heavy-handed editing that they took in publishing his book, right before publishing the book, these two books. He decided to go ahead and publish his third book on his own, so he traveled to Buffalo, New York. And this book was entitled The Antiquities of the State of New York, where he shared this observation. He said, "There is almost positive evidence that the mound builders were an agricultural people, considerably advanced in the arts and possessing great uniformity throughout the whole territory, which they occupied in manners, habits, and religion. A uniformity sufficiently marked to identify them as a single people, having a common origin, a common modes of life, and as a consequence, common sympathies, if not a common and consolidated government. The battle of opinions would escalate, followed by personal attacks against Squire's work, as it would take its toll on his health, evidently, because he was committed to an insane asylum for the last 14 years of his life." Now, E.G. Squires, in his 1851 book, The Antiquities of the State of New York, where he shared this quote that I thought was very interesting. And this is from the history of the Holland Purchase. "The bone pits, which occur in some parts of Western New York, Canada, Michigan, etc., have unquestionably a corresponding origin. They are of various sizes, but usually contain a large number of skeletons. One of the pits, discovered some years ago in the town of Cambion, Niagara County, was estimated to contain the bones of several thousand individuals. This locality was visited by Mr. O'Turner in Buffalo, New York in 1823. Now, 1823 is an important date, for it was the very same year that the doctrine of discovery debate was being waged before the U.S. Supreme Court. The case was Johnson versus McIntosh, where they ruled that the Indians only had the right to occupancy of the land and not ownership of land. The reasoning given was that the Indians were not evolved to the state of a full human. This early ruling would really change how we have come to view and value the American Indian populations here in North America, and how we would view these ancient mound-building cultures, changing how America's history has really been handed down to our day. This ruling led to the Indian Removal Act of 1830. That very same year, as I mentioned, that the Book of Mormon came off the press. And the same year that Joseph Smith had called and sent missionaries to the Indians, as referenced in the 28th section and the 32nd section of the Doctrine and Covenants, as Oliver's mission to the Lamanites. Upon the 1830 publication of the Book of Mormon, where Joseph Smith sent some of his most loyalist followers on a mission. And this is from Parley P. Pratt's autobiography. It states, It was now October 1830. A revelation had been given through the mouth of his prophet, seer, and translator, in which Oliver Cowdery, Peter Whitmer, Zeba Peterson, and myself, and that was Parley P. Pratt, were appointed to go into the wilderness to the Indian Territory. After traveling for some days, we called upon the Indians near Buffalo, New York, and spent part of the day with them, instructing them in the knowledge of and the record of their forefathers. We were kindly received, and much interest was manifest by them on hearing this news. We had preached the gospel in its fullness and distributed a record of their forefathers among 3 tribes: the Cataracus Indians of Buffalo, New York, the Whatnots of Ohio, and the Delaware Indians west of Missouri. And this quote was on page 66. The Delaware Indians chief requested that the missionaries return in the spring. However, because of an order by the federal agent, William Clark, the missionaries were expelled from the Indian Territory. This quote is found in a recently published book by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints entitled The Revelations in Context, printed in 2016, page 48. One site that we visited was the Miamisburg Mound site in Ross County, Ohio, which gives evidence of a more advanced civilization. Many of these early settlers and explorers believed in a lost race because they didn't believe that the American Indian, as viewed as a savage culture, would be capable of the sustained effort needed to quarry tons of earth. The Miamisburg Mound is 68 feet high. It's 852 feet in circumference. Contains over 311,000 cubic feet of soil, which consist of over 20,000 wagon loads of dirt. And this wasn't all. There are over 500 mounds and over 100 giant earthworks enclosures found in Ross County, Ohio alone. In addition to this, you have the Hopewell Road, which kind of interconnected a lot of these different sites. This is a 60-mile long road made of a cement-like material. The date, as found right in front, on the front of the plaque at this site, is from 1000 BC to 400 AD, which is a very interesting correlation to the Book of Mormon timeline. So is there evidence of more highly advanced civilizations? Found in different areas of America's heartland are these giant geometric earthworks in which the mound builders constructed giant circles and with giant squares, which are very symbolic of heaven and earth. These reoccurring ceremonial sites give evidence of a centralized government designed by some master architect. We were blessed to be able to interview no less an authority than Dr. Roger Kennedy, a former director of the Smithsonian American History Museum, just prior to his passing in 2011, where he talks about evidences of a more refined people. In his landmark book, Hidden Cities, in which he published in 1994, Dr. Kennedy recounts the startling personal events that led him to writing his book, inspired by what he was found while exploring subterranean caves found in the state of Indiana. He realized from the artifacts found that others had walked through those same caves centuries earlier. Dr. Roger Kennedy went on to say in his book that few realize that some of the most complex structures of ancient archaeology were built in North America, home of some of the most highly advanced and well-organized civilizations in the world. After seeing our documentary, The Lost Civilizations of North America, Dr. Kennedy says, well, it wasn't lost. It was hidden. You ought to consider changing your name. So who were these mound building cultures? And where did they come from? And how did this silence surrounding their history come about? Let me just share you this clip. This is Dr. Roger Kennedy speaking.
Who created the settled places, the agriculture, the urban design, the engineering, and the astronomy that preceded us, preceded we European Americans, are not quite us. They are other people, we felt. And in the European American tradition, there's a long, long history of our saying to ourselves, oh, no, that's those people. And those people can't be as good as us people. They couldn't have built those great big things.
Thankfully, today's scientific community is beginning to take a renewed look at what artifacts and ancient cities yet remain, such as these once city walls, intentionally preserved as mounds in a golf course in Newark, Ohio.
I'm standing here at the parallel walls that connect the gigantic octagon with a large circle. The circle is 1,054 feet in diameter. The octagon encloses 50 acres, which is large enough to encompass 4 Roman Colosseums. This was built by the ancient Hopewell culture that lived in this region between about 100 BC and AD 400.
The level of precision, it is incredible.
The entire Newark earthworks encompasses 4.5 square miles, and it was the largest complex of geometric earthworks ever built in the world. It includes 2 circles, a gigantic octagon, a square. But actually what we call the Hopewell culture, things like it at least, and things related to it, covered much of eastern North America in different parts. As far south as Florida, as far west as Kansas City, as far east as perhaps New York.
They had to be incredibly sophisticated to be able to build these mounds perfectly, in unison to an octagon shape and a circular shape.
It's clear that they rival, by any scale, any other cultural achievement in the world. The Great Pyramids, the Great Wall of China, the Roman Colosseum.
I'm not that surprised by it. There's so many other things that we see when we start learning about and looking into Native culture that I think people on the surface may be surprised because they tend to think of Indian people as anti-intellectual or, non-scientific or somehow, living in the backwoods and not knowledgeable about things like that.
The knowledge embedded in these earthworks and encoded in their structure is anything but primitive. It's remarkable.
It also shows that not just high math, but these sites are lined up primarily with the lunar calendar. They had high math, they understood geometry, and because of the lunar calendar, they also understood the heavens, astronomy.
What I've learned now is just how amazing they were in terms of their knowledge of the solar system and of mathematics.
And the lunar calendar comes from the Mediterranean, and then they had the unit of measurement was 606, which they call the stade. One side of the Great Pyramid from the base to the tip of the apex is 606 feet. If you square inside the octagon, which the surveyors like to call, it's a term they use, squaring the circle, and you divide that up into 4 equal parts inside of cubes, you'll find those cubes are all made of 606-foot lines per cube side. The angle of the Great Pyramid of Egypt runs 51.8 degrees up the slope from the base to the angle. That measurement is there, and when you come off of the baseline at Newark and you run true north and then measure that angle back to the baseline, what do we find? 51.8 degrees. So did they have the same math as the ancient Egyptians? Well, I gotta say, yeah, it sure looks like it.
It's as inspiring, I think, in its way as the NASA program to send a man to the moon.
Most of the Mediterranean societies, civilizations, ran their calendar on the lunar cycle, or a 13-month calendar. And that can be fully demonstrated with the Hopewell people as well. Again, another nice parallel to the Mediterranean contact.
And what a special place it is. You feel that right away. You feel it immediately when you're there. I was in a kind of strange position because I was on a job interview when they took me to the site, and I was literally just from the presence of the place moved to tears and felt kind of uncomfortable as a person in a job interview, but yet having these strong emotional feelings and some connection to this place and the history that was there. And it just occurred to me, how could this be?
So who are the people that built these giant earthen constructions? In studying the early histories of America's heartland, we found it interesting to see how some of the earliest settlers viewed the origin of the Indian. One group was the early Jesuits, who viewed the Indian in a different light than most, for they were seekers of the lost 10 tribes, believing that the Native Americans might have be of Jewish descent, who just needed to be familiarized with their heritage. Reverend John Eliot of Roxbury, Massachusetts, in a spirited effort to convert the Algonquin tribes of Indians, made a translation of many parts of the Bible to the Algonquin language. He and Roger Williams were of the branch of Puritans, still cleaving to this view that the Indians were a people worthy of salvation. And then you have William Penn, disposed towards conversion rather than extinction of the Indians, reported that the Indians of Pennsylvania resembled the Jews of London. One of the earliest writers to explore the ruins and the origin of the Indians was James Adair, who traded and resided among the Indians for some 40 years, where he was encouraged to write a book in 1775 entitled The History of the American Indians. In it, he stated, "As I traded among the Indian Americans, I was forced to believe them, descendants from the Israelites. This descent I shall endeavor to prove from religious rites, civil and marital customs, funeral ceremonies, manners, language, and traditions." There are many early historical books that was making this type of a connection, given similar evidence as James Adair did. Another defining experience on my path of discovery here was when I visited Mound City National Park in Ohio. We pulled up in a bus, and we got our film crew out, and I pulled out a map that I was looking at on the bus, which was Squire and Davis's book, which was the first publication of the Smithsonian, The Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley. And in it, I turned to this giant earthen construction, which really looks like a Hebrew oil lamp and a menorah. So I asked the park director, as we were there, where I needed to go to see this giant earthen construction. And the park director stated, well, you can get in your car and you can go down to Milford, Ohio. And there at the crossroads, that is where it was. But the Army Corps of Engineers came in and wiped it clean. And the thought that kind of ran through my mind, well, isn't this America's antiquities? And so who was in a position of power to pull that trigger, to make that call, to really destroy the incredible record of antiquities? And the name that kept rising to the top was a major in the Army Corps of Engineers, Major John Wesley Powell. And so come to realize that he was over mound building exploration, and he was over the ethnology department of the Smithsonian that was looking at the artifacts coming out of these mounds. In the production of our documentary, The Lost Civilizations of North America, we set out to interview the foremost scholars that we could find who had studied these ancient mound building cultures and ancient history, and in so doing, an understanding of this daunting history emerged as we came to realize that this is a larger history than just the loss of America's antiquities, which is huge, or even the exploration of the geography of the Book of Mormon in North America. It is a story of how and why the recovery of this knowledge has been hampered, hidden, and manipulated, and how the provocations were motivated by a myriad of issues facing these early men in science and government in the 1800s, and how it has had a huge effect on the American Indians, and how this history has been handed down to our day. After running the mighty Colorado, John Wesley Powell became a national folk hero. His stories and encounters with the Indians and the Mormons became legendary as he would return to the East and find his professional home in Washington, D.C., where he became director over the Bureau of Ethnology at the Smithsonian and director over the U.S. Geological Survey Department and director over mound building exploration. In these positions, he would have a profound influence on how these ancient artifacts would be classified. Now, John Wesley Powell's biographer stated that the man that understood it was the one-armed little man with a bristly beard, a homemade education and an intense concentration of purpose. When he assumed the joint dictatorship of two bureaus in which he had created, Powell controlled a good part of the science of man and the science of the earth, and he conceived both in the broadest possible terms. It just so happens that John Wesley Powell's father was a Methodist minister in Palmyra, New York, when the Book of Mormon came off the press. Now, Powell's life really shadowed the migration of the early pioneers and saints as they migrated from Western New York into Illinois and then on to Utah. Now, another of Powell's biographers, Donald Worcester, gives us this insight. Powell's life is also a story of the rising influence of the natural sciences and of rationalism contesting the faith of traditional religion, and of a new nationalism and secularism taking its place. As he was coming of age, science was rising to influence the study of nature and culture, and even the making of laws. In his day, science meant, above all, geology, evolution, and Darwinism. The context of these ideas of what is now called religious fundamentalism for the supremacy of the American mind was mirrored in Powell as nowhere else. Lewis Henry Morgan, the American father of anthropology, who has been credited with advancing social Darwinism to the American culture, after meeting with evolutionary theorists Charles Darwin and Sir John Lubbock in England, Morgan returned home to write his most notable works, Ancient Society, where he came up with what he called the stages of human evolution, that man evolved from savagery to barbarism onto civilization, seeing the Indians as savages, seeing fundamental religionness as barbaric on this course towards a more civilized state. Now, both Morgan and John Wesley Powell, was from the Rochester, Palmyra area. And both of them would come together in Buffalo, New York, and to organize the American Association for the Advancement of Science, in which both of them became president over that organization, where they worked to elevate science in a very real sense above religion. Now, Lewis Henry Morgan became a mentor to John Wesley Powell. Powell's inspired by the writings of Morgan on these stages of human evolution, began to realize that he could use these evolutionary concepts into the origin of man as a tool for social reform. Powell's conviction that every variant could be placed somewhere on this evolutionary stairway gave direction and systems to Powell's work in ethnology. Emerging from this evolutionary stairway would be the enthronement of Darwinism, creating a whole new vision for society, as they would begin to view the origin of man and the origin of society through this lens of evolutionary thought, changing how society has come to view and value the American Indian, and many other things in our culture today. I mean, if you're looking through the evolutionary lens, how do you value children in the world today? Do you see children as divine creatures touched by the finger of God, or are they just another animal in the animal kingdom? How about marriage and family? Is that divine, or is it just traditional? Along with many other societal norms. If you're looking through the evolutionary lens, it changes a lot of things found in society today. John Wesley Powell, as director of the Bureau of Ethnology at the Smithsonian, came up with what he called the Powell Doctrine on limitations to the use of some anthropologic data. The Powell Doctrine states, with regards to the mounds so widely scattered between two oceans, okay, he's acknowledging that there was mounds scattered between the two oceans. It may also be said the mound builders, tribes, were known to the early history and discovery of this continent, and that the vestiges of art discovered do not excel in any respect the art of the Indians, tribes, now to history. There is therefore no reason to use or to search for this extra-liminal origin through the lost tribes for arts discovered in the mounds of North America. Hence, it will be seen that it is illegitimate to use any petrographic matter of a date anterior to the discovery of this continent by Columbus for historical purposes. Okay, this was a quote that was shared by the Bureau of Ethnology, in which John Wesley Powell was director. From the Copper Age to the Bronze Age, on to the Iron Age, every ancient explorer was in pursuit of precious metals. Metals found in rich abundance here in America's heartland. In the lower right-hand corner, you see a picture of a skeleton. And there, skeleton, you see a copper breastplate and a head plate there. A lot of copper was being mined and shipped to foreign shores. In reading from the Smithsonian's Institute of the Bureau of Ethnology's annual report, in which it was actually 675 pages under the then director, John Wesley Powell, William H. Holmes, who authored a number of the chapters over the years, shared their North American findings, stating that a general review of the contents of the graves show that the ancient inhabitants were skillful in the manipulation of stone, gold, copper, clay, and tombs of undoubtedly great antiquity, which yield evidence of a long continued culture. In North America, ornaments of stone were seldom used by them, and those of gold and copper were common, unquote. The area that boasts some of the most purest copper found in the world is found in Michigan around Lake Superior. The count of the ancient mines discovered is over 5,000 ancient mines there in just Isles Royale area alone. It is estimated that there was over 500,000 tons of copper that came out of those mines, traded to copper-hungry visitors visiting America. Other ancient mines are found in Wisconsin, Tennessee, Georgia, and southern Ohio. The thin copper leaf that you see here is what they found in the Okamoki Mounds sites in Macon, Georgia, which really shows that evidence of that they were doing nice refined copper in the Americas. Now, historians from many foreign lands share their pre-Columbian histories of voyages being made to America, such as the Vikings, the Assyrians, the Phoenicians, the Greeks, the Egyptians, the Jews, the Polynesians, the Japanese, the Chinese, the Welsh. They all had seafaring vessels capable of braving the ocean, driven by the prevailing winds and currents. They visited many foreign shores. This graph shows of many ships being launched from Mediterranean harbors from 1500 BC to 1500 AD. This last year, I had the opportunity to speak in Verona, Italy, at the World Congress of Families 13 on the demographic winter, the decline of the human family, on a documentary that we produced. That really looks at the disintegration of the natural family, below replacement fertility rates, aging population, and the effects that had on global economies worldwide. And in a very real sense, we need to take a hard look on really what was happening in the Americas when it comes to the demographics. Now, my wife and I reached out to a local friend there and asked, to have him take us and show us some naval museums. And he says, yes, I know where a naval museum is, down below Rome, down the coast. And so we got in his car and we headed down the coast to this museum. And this museum was built originally to house this giant ship of Roman times that sunk in the harbor and became engulfed in mud. I am standing here to just kind of give perspective on the size of this ship, as it just shows the lower deck and the rudder of this boat. This gives some perspective as to the size and the magnitude of this ship. Now, this ship was crafted, from plans dated to 240 BC. According to the biblical timeline, there were many cultures building ships. For example, Noah built a giant barge at about 4,300 years ago. Found in 1 Kings chapter 5 is a story of King Solomon, who had amassed a large naval force at the same time as in history that the Queen of Sheba, the Queen of Egypt and Ethiopia, was credited of having over 400 seafaring vessels capable of braving the ocean worldwide. Besides trading routes being established east and west, how about the trading routes that were probably being established north and south? Up and down the major rivers of America's heartland. Found to be traded to Central and South America, for example, was mica from Ohio, or the Maya blue dye that you see in Chichen Itza and Tulum and other locations in Central America, was really from clay and dyes just found in the state of Georgia. Also found in the Hopewell Mounds was obsidian, a glass-like stone of volcanic origin used for spears and arrowheads. However, obsidian is really not found in the heartland area. Yes, they could have probably found it around in the Rocky Mountains, around Yellowstone, but the likelihood is that it was traded up and down the major rivers of America's heartland, and it probably came from Central and South America, or Mexico. From these rivers, you can easily float down to those areas in Central and South America. Also traded was tobacco, a native crop of North America, which was being cultivated in the heart of the Hopewell country. Tobacco was in great demand anciently, commonly traded like money is today. Found in many Hopewell mounds were ancient tobacco platform pipes, credited to the Hopewell culture. Found also in Central and South America were some of these platform pipes, which are really signature Hopewell. So were they trading partners? Yes, you'd got to think so. On this slide, I cataloged some 40 ancient archaeological sites found in North America, listing the published dates of these ancient archaeological sites and placed them in chronological order. In so doing, these are some of the findings that I kind of pulled and I learned from that exercise. The dating shows that there were fortifications that were beginning to be constructed, beginning, in the lower river areas of America's heartland, starting in about 1500 BC. Then the date would suggest a northern migration up to more mineral-rich areas of America's heartland, traveling up these rivers, such as the Ohio, the Tennessee, the Chattahoochee River, the Savannah, and the Wabash rivers. There, the Hopewell and the Adena culture grew, and they started to build these giant earthen constructions and fortifications until about 400 to 500 AD, when most all of these constructions started to grind to a halt due to some kind of altercation or genocide that was taking place. So if their cities and homes were being burnt down and winter was setting in, and you knew that there was warmer climates to the south, what would you do? Would you take flight down to one of these rivers to a warmer climate? And how would you do that? Well, probably float down, create a raft or a boat of some sort, and go down one of the major rivers, thinking that it would be a flight into safety. But was it a flight into safety, or was it a flight into slavery? As they would go down these various rivers, as is kind of depicted here, there was probably a raiding party ready to gather them up and put them into slavery. Now, one of the most obscure topics not covered in our ancient America history textbooks is the extent that ancient Indian slave trade was taking place, probably between North and South America. Throughout history, we find that almost every ancient earthen construction of ancient times was being constructed under the yoke of slave labor, from the great pyramids of Egypt to the great Colosseums of Rome, to the great China walls of China, to the ruins of Central and South America. They all used slave labor. So how common was slavery among the Indian populations? Some historians believe that the ancient populations of America, both South and North, were heavily involved in the slave business in one way or another, either as captives or as slavers. So Native American tribes held captives as slaves prior and even during the European colonization. Did you know that? One of the new insights that I picked up on was how extensive this was, especially starting about 200 AD, as there was major trade routes being established north and south. Dr. Franklin Kill, director of the Eastern Area Office of the Bureau of Indian Affairs for the U.S. government, he had oversight over 28 Indian nations for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Franklin is a Native American Chickasaw, and he has Choctaw blood, working for the federal government for some 40 years. In our travels with Franklin, he shared with me a couple of stories He stated that he learned from tribal leaders that there is a story very similar to a story shared in the Book of Mormon of wicked King Noah, who was a wicked king who sent out his priests, and they did tribal raids, carrying off the women and children and putting them in slavery. Franklin stated that this was a story that he heard over and over again, as slave trafficking was huge, especially during the Mississippian culture period. For example, at Cahokia, which is across the river in St. Louis, this was a very large ancient city that rivaled Rome in its day, dating back from about 650 AD to about 1400 AD, peaking at about 1100 AD. Now, Cahokia had over 300 ceremonial and burial mounds. In Mound 72, they uncovered an inner chamber, a dominant burial of what looked to be a ruler laying on some 20,000 shell beads. And around him was women who had been sacrificed. Now, this all screams of slavery. When Franklin asked the tribal leader as to who built these giant mounds, the answer that he would continue to get back is that our people built the mounds, the Indian people built the mounds. And he says, what, we got up one morning, we decided to go out and build this giant earthen construction, moving, hundreds of thousands of yards of material. And he says, no, what happened was that the Snake people came up from the south and enslaved us. And we built this giant earthen constructions under the yoke of slavery. So did the Olmecs, the Toltecs, the Aztecs, the Mayans raid the Indian populations of North America and carrying them off as slaves, and were captives taken south to build these pyramids and giant earthen constructions. And if so, like the children of Israel, would they hold to their religious teachings? And would those teachings be manifest in their architecture, as found in North and South and Central America, as you find, a common thread there? Thus, helping to answer the age-old question as to how religious teachings, practices, and art were being exchanged, both North and South. No wonder that you can find similar art and architecture depicting Lehi's dream of the tree of life and the plan of salvation and temple symbolisms. So not only did Christ visit both continents, in which he said, other sheep I have, which are not of this fold, them also I will go visit, but I believe that as a result of slavery, that you could probably find descendants of Lehi, both North, South, and Central America. So how could this be? Well, primarily as a result of slavery. Let me share with you a video clip from our documentary, The Lost Civilizations of North America, where Roger Kennedy, the director of the Smithsonian American History Museum, gave additional insights into the magnitude of the size of these ancient cultures.
In 1991, while serving as the director of the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History, historian Roger Kennedy was shocked to learn, for the first time, that massive ancient city remains existed in North America.
Very, very few of us were conscious of the immensity of a place like Monk's Mound at Cahokia, opposite St. Louis, which is bigger in its footprint than the Great Pyramid at Giza. We didn't know that.
Most Americans have no idea that ancient cities with advanced architectures once dotted the ancient North American landscape. Director Kennedy has since coined a name for such places.
What I call hidden cities. I use the term because these were very big places. There were more people, we now know, in Cahokia, across from St. Louis, than there were in London or Rome. There were major population centers in what are now Nashville and Cincinnati and Pittsburgh and St. Louis.
Why is it that top historians didn't know about such things? How is it that this knowledge was kept from the modern public as well?
That people are unaware of Hopewell and Cahokia as world-class achievements, of course, UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Not only did Kennedy, as a historian at the Smithsonian, not know about them, at least one president of the Society for American Archaeology had never been to Cahokia, even by the time he retired at the age of 70.
I'm actually one of the people who didn't know all that much about the Hopewell civilization. And in fact, I grew up in the Midwest. I'm from Michigan.
There were tens of thousands of architectural consequences that are now hidden behind our junk and our architectural achievements.
Once I started talking about it, I found lots of other Native people who had no idea that these sites existed and were there and what they were all about and the history of them. That, to me, in and of itself, is amazing, that that level of just silence around this.
We now know more about this silence. We know of an advanced ancient civilization that inhabited North America, lost to our modern memories because of 19th century political and scientific agendas.
It is my hope that we'll be able to elevate the value placed on these ancient mound building cultures, as there's voices from the dust that are crying to be heard. For this is a larger history that must be understood. Thank you.